Abraham Faour, who requested this, wants to give a little introduction. So, Tfaddalu.
Shalom Aleichem. Chacham Aaron, it's a pleasure to see you. And it's a pleasure to see so many people who joined this class. And a few weeks ago, I was speaking with Chacham Aaron. He's one of the only people in the world, I think, that if I have a question in Gemara or if I'm studying a difficult sugya and I want to figure out, get a second opinion. So I called him up to get his opinion about some inyan, how to structure the sugya. And there's not really, I can't think of anybody else in the world that I would call for that. So I was thinking it would be great to have Chacham Aaron teach us the first sugya Masechet Berakhoth. I know he studied it with my father, but I also want to say that one thing I learned from my father is, and one thing that he is that it didn't stop with him, which is to say, he taught us not just the sugya, but he taught us how to study the sugya. So I'm sure that whatever Chacham Aaron is going to teach us today is not going to be just what my father taught him, which is the Yesodot, but I'm sure he's going to have his own insights as well. So I'm very excited about this class, so much so that I insisted that all my sons are attending some in a different place. Rabbi Joey, I hope you're doing well. I have Ishaq next to me, I have Shlomo next to me, so we're all very excited about this class. And I think that your knowledge of Gemara is something that we can all benefit from. So that's my introduction. And also, I just want to make one special request. When you get to the Seboraitic parts of the Sugya, I think we would all be interested in learning from you. How is it that you identify something as Seboraitic?
Okay, very good, very good. Thank you very much. Yeah, what we try to study here is Surah Nishma'ateta, of course, which the Chacham taught us, but also what he called Derech Talmud, and the uniqueness. I think he restored Derech Talmud pretty much. I mean, I saw a little vestige of it in Yisrael Moshe Hazan, who has to disagree with his grandfather, Rafael Yosef Hazan. But nobody like Chacham Faour Hazaken ever really made a big, what he would call halabaloo, about Derech Talmud, which is critical to studying Torah. Everybody's studying Gemara, but no one studies Derech Talmud. I think it's left on our shoulders to do that. So, let me see now. Admit two guests. Okay. Middle. Okay, there we go. So I think you can all see this. This is my handout. I've used it several times for the sugya. I just want to, I used to teach it by setting up a whole background, the pasuk, etc. But I think I'm going to, I'll do this part. But as we find it in the sugya, I'm going to revert back to the background materials so you see exactly where it fits in the context. But there's going to be an important pasuk. This is in Emor. It's talking about teruma. Who can eat teruma and when? So Kohanim eat teruma, but there must be tehorim. Oh, and by the way, if anybody has any questions, don't be shy about it. As my son Israel likes to say, don't be shy about it now. Just jump in there, okay? Because Zoom is distant anyway, so we can remedy the distance by, jump in there. If something hits you, you don't have to wait. It's always better spontaneous. Okay, so now we have this pasuk. Nefesh asher tiga'bo v'tamea ad ha'arev v'lo yochal min ha'kodashim ki im rachas b'saro b'mayim. Okay, so Kohanim have to, if they're timeim, they have to go to the tebilah before they can eat teruma. And since that's their main sustenance, if they're tameh, they're probably not eating anything or very little all afternoon. They're waiting to eat their evening meal b'tahora. Fine. Pasuk says, "Uba hashemesh v'taher ve'achar yochal min ha'kodashim." When the sun sets, v'taher, what that means is the subject of the sugya. Ve'achar yochal min hakodashim, and after he's tahor, he can eat from the kodashim. That refers to the tiruma. Ki lachmohu, because it's his day-to-day sustenance. What does it mean? Uba hashemesh v'taher. The whole sugya is going to turn on it. What's the original? It's very important when we read a sugya like this to have a perspective of, okay, we know what the pasuk is saying. That's great. But what is the original context? How would people have understood this in 1300 BC when it was first articulated, right? So I love Abraham ibn Azra. He always does that. He tries to give you what the pasuk generally means without derashot, without any kind of rabbinic reinterpretation or categorization or definitions. So he says, Uba hashemesh v'taher. First of all, what tense is taher? Anybody know? Present tense, but what's the form? It can be binyan kal, and it is, but it's called a stative verb. So it's like zaken, haham, shamen, all these descriptors, they're intransitive verbs. You don't do anything. You just are. You are this attribute for whatever reason. So, uba hashemesh, sun sets, v'taher, and he is tahor. That's a stative verb. Just describes a state of being.
Aaron, Mechila, that I'm interrupting you.
No problem.
My father once told me, when people say Berakhoth Levana, they have this thing where they say and they
Yes.
jump up and down. And my father, Allah Shalom, explained to me that it's a state of verb. The Merakadim means this is what we're doing all the time. So you don't need to jump up and down, to show the moon that you're Merakeh.
Yeah. Yes. That's very good. Thank you. Yes. So uba hashemesh v'taher. Here's Abraham ibn Azra. Yadua ki v'taher shab el hatameh. The verb v'taher refers back to the tabe kohen. Kimo v'chiper aleha kohen v'tahera. Like when a kohen does a ritual for a yoledet, and v'chiper aleha kohen v'tahera, once he does the kapara process, she automatically becomes tehora. The end of pasuk zecher yom. There's no reference to what time of day it is. Rak hazal ha'atiku afilu sheyabo hashemesh lo yochal ad sur ha'or. The hakkokhabhim said that this v'taher refers to the sky and the amount of light in the sky, not what people understood it when they first heard it. It refers to the kohen, stative verb, which means automatically at sunset, you're automatically tahor. Just like once the kohen does the ritual of tahara for the yoledet, she's automatically betahera. You don't have to do anything. Okay, it's not a command or anything like that. But there's no mention of yom besides uba hashemesh. But the hachamim ma'atikeh shemu'ah, that refers to oral tradition, oral Torah shebe'al peh. Afilu sheyabo hashemesh, even though it was bi'at shimsho, that's sunset, lo yochal ad sur ha'or. You can't eat the tirumah until a later period post sunset. And what is that? That later period is, let me let this fellow in. Okay. And that later period is when all the residual light post sunset is cleaned from the rakia. The samu zeh pasuk. So that's the law that the hachamim ha'atiku. It's not that they're not saying this is what the pasuk means. They are connecting the law which they made. That's why we say ha'atiku. Afilu she'avo hashemesh lo yochal atzur ha'or v'samu zeh pasuk asmachta. And this pasuk is really only a index. It's a pointer. It's like a asmachta. Literally means juxtaposition. When you put two things next to each other, you put the new law, ad sur ha'or, next to the pasuk, and you kind of induce people to say, the pasuk could be read that way. That's what an asmachta is. Ka'asher pirashti bepasuk le'am nochri, alken amru taher yoma. So the hachamim say this is taher yoma, although we all know it's shab el hatameh in the original explanation. So that should, whenever Abraham ibn Azra does that, he's pointing to a din mufla, because he's telling you the original understanding of Bnei Israel in 1300 BC was A, but the hachamim said there's a law B, and this pasuk now points you to law B. And that's the art of derashat, to make it sound like it almost could have meant that originally. That's the art of derashat. Okay, so that's important that you know. I just have the Targum here. I don't think we need that. You need to know one more thing. So this is the Sifra. So the Sifra is Midrash Halacha on Sefer Vayikra, in which Perashat Emor falls. Okay, so the Sifra has a comment here. Uba hashemesh v'taher bi'at shimsho. Notice they use the words bi'at shimsho, which means sunset. מעכבתו מלאכול בתרומה, ואין כפרתו מעכבתו מלאכול. This is a type of מלאכול בתרומה. ובא השמש וטהר. This just tells you that the only thing in your way, me'akeb, is to be in the way. The only thing that's in your way from eating the tiruma, if you were a tabul yom. I have to tell you that that's part of the context here. This kohen is talking about a tabul yom, means someone who is zab or mesorah, and they've done the taharot, and they went to they finished the taharot that the kohen does, and now it's the daytime. Let's say it's Tuesday day. Even though they had the taharot, they are allowed to eat ma'aser, but not tiruma, not kadashim. So that's called tabul yom. You have to wait until there's a tevilah in order for you to be more tahor, second stage tahor, and then you have to bring a korban the next day, which is the third stage, allows you to eat kadashim. Okay, so the Sifra says, it's the sunset that prevents you from eating the tiruma, but not the kapara you have to do the next day, let's say for a mesorah, right? Okay, so far so good. I'm going to skip what Harambam says, and this is the Tosefta. We'll come back to it. Now I want to start this. Let's review the Mishnah. Of course, we have a tune. I learned this tune from Hacham Fa'or alayhi salam. Me'ematai korin et shema be'arbin misha'a shehakohanim nichnasin le'echol betrumatan. So that's the first half. It has two halves. Just like the Sugya originally had two halves, this has two halves. Notice there's a rhyme. Why do we have rhymes in the Mishnah? So you can remember it. Why do we have a tune? So you can remember it. In fact, at the end of Masechet Megillah, Rabbi Shefatya Amar Rabbi Yohanan says, "Hakore belo ne'ima, v'hashone belo zemira." If you read the Mikra without the ta'amim, or you recite Torah shebe'al peh without the zemira, without the nigun, Allah tekatuv omer v'natati lachem chokim lo tovim mishpatim bal yechyu bahem. These laws, these mishpatim, will not persist. They will not be perpetuated. They won't live in you, right? So we have to do the tune that people remember it. We didn't come from the officials' classical Sephardic education, but some people, very old timers who I've known, did. My father-in-law did. I don't know if in Brooklyn they taught Mishnayot, but in some they did teach Mishnayot. And those people knew the Mishnah with the tune from like ages 5 through 10. They'd never forget it. We had to learn it after the fact. All right. So, from what time do you recite the Shema at night? There's no mahloket here. It's just said bistam. From the hour that the Kohanim come back, niknasin, to their homes after having done the Tevilah and sunset has occurred. That's fine. So we're asking a question about the laws of Kiryat Shema, and we're invoking another set of laws, which is Kohanim being fit to eat teruma. That's a little strange, and that's what the Sugya is going to deal with. And here's the second half. It has Ad Sof 3 times. Ad Sof ha'ashmoret harishona divrei Rabbi Eliezer. So there's no mahloket on the beginning of the window in which you recite Kiryat Shema Shel Arvit, but there are 3 terminus times. Rabbi Eliezer is the earliest, end of the first Ashmoret, which is about 1/3 of the night. V'chachamim omrim ad hasot, Rabban Gamliel omer ad sheya'aleh amud hashahar. So the Chachamim say until Hasot. Rabban Gamliel says until Alot hashahar, like the beginning of dawn in the next morning. Okay. This is just Harambam. I'm not going to read that, so we can make sure we finish the Sugya. So now, this is a Seboraitic introduction. Interestingly, the first Sugya in a Masechet sometimes has Seboraitic introduction, Masechet Kiddushin, and there are others. how do you know the vocabulary? First of all, this is all bistam. There's no emoraim mentioned. So that's one index. So who's speaking? The Seboraitic are speaking, but they don't really, there's no emoraim there. You don't name any of them, right? It's like a post setam, setan. Also, the vocabulary hakkokhabhim. Now, I'm sure many of you know this stands for hakkokhabhim, to stand on. The people who spoke Aramaic dropped the final mem. They sometimes dropped the final ayin. They didn't pronounce the ayin, etc., etc. So Tana, the Tana in our Mishnah. What was he referring to when he said the words be'ematai? Because you start. This is the beginning of the Masechet. This chapter deals with Kiryat Shema. So if you're going to talk about an area of law, you would imagine we first establish as a foundation the obligation, and then we go to when's the time, right? Here we're just jumping in the middle. We're just saying, when do you read Shema? Like there's an underlying premise that you have to read the Shema, but it doesn't go into that. So what was our Tana referring to or standing upon literally? Now there's a difference. This is Seboraitic language also. Tane versus katane. Tane is the first time you introduce something. Katane refers back to another section that you already know. So we already know the Mishnah. You can't study a Sugya without the Mishnah. Katane refers to something recited in the Mishnah. It's opposed to Tane, which is the first time you introduce something, like we're going to see later on when they introduce a Baraita, they don't say Katane. Vetu, so first question, what was he referring to? He's opened with a when interrogative. He should have opened with the what. Vetu, this is also, I think, Seboraitic. Vetu, it's Indo-European. Vetu is like duo, secondly, right? It's not Hebrew. We would say veram, maybe. Ma'ishena detane be'arvin beresha, litene de shachrit beresha. So there's another premise here. The day begins in the morning. Even when Maran made Shulchan Aruch, he opens with what you do in the morning. What happens in the night is later, right? So there's a premise here. If you're going to talk about the mitzvah of Kiryat Shema, why don't you start in the morning? That's the so litne de shachrit beresha. Tana akira. Our Tana was standing on a pasuk. We all know in the Kiryat Shema it says twice, the first paragraph and the second paragraph. And this is what he really meant to say. The time for reciting the Shema when you go to sleep. Now here he's echoing the word b'shoch becha, same shoresh, right? Dishkiva emat. We're going to understand later why you used a pointer, right? You could have said a time. You didn't say a time. You said the time that the Kohanim return home to eat Tirumah. We still don't know what that is, but it's a pointer to another law, right? Now, what is this? When you say akera ka'eh, does anybody know what that implicitly says? No Torah shebe'al peh. If you say Tana Hikaka'eh, usually a Sugya opens, you quote, you quote the Mishnah, and they say, Mina hanemile, de Tanu, Rabbana, and then you have a nice Baraita, which fills in the background of the Mishnah we just studied. Here, we don't have that. We just have the Mishnah. It opens with Me'ematai, and we don't have any rabbinic material whatsoever, no Baraita at all, to support the mitzvah obligation, or what this time has to do with the Kohanim, etc. So,
and Chacham, if you remember, one of the first years we studied with my father was in Masechet Makot.
Yes.
And you're right, they brought the end of Masechet Sanhedrin as the starting point for Masechet Kesed Ha'edim Na'aseh Zomimim.
That's right. Exactly. That's right. So now, we admit we don't have a Tanaic source. We don't have a Baraita. We don't have any backstory to the Mishnah. The Mishnah is really later than the Midrash Halacha. Although the Midrash Halacha we have Sifra and Sifret Berab, it was edited and published by Rab, but the material is much older and it precedes the Mishnah. Okay. And if you want, I'll give you another answer. Yalif biriyato shel olam. The word yalif is unique because it refers to something from before Har Sinai, right? So yalif biriyato shel olam. He learned from the creation of the world. So the night begins the day, the night comes before the day. So it makes sense to deal with Kiryat Shema Shel Arvit first, and then deal with Kiryat Shema Shel Shachrit. Oh, so far so good. That's the first half of the Seboraitic introduction.
If I could just point out, the Yalif was also that it's not the Peshat in the Pasuk, that it's a Derasha, which also lends itself to this being a Din Mufla.
Oh, yes, absolutely. That's right. So that's in opposition to Ka'eh. Before it said Akira Ka'eh. Ka'eh is in opposition to Yalif, right? Okay.
Is Yalif usually there a good term to look out for in the context of Dinim Muflaim?
Yeah, sure. But this technical meaning is something from before Har Sinai. You're referring to a pasuk in the portion of the Torah from Bereshit through Yitro. Or up till Yitro. That's what Yalif is. So when you say Yalif, there's no binding obligation pasuk, what Hamfa'u used to call Mabba' Bisu'in, right? Everything from Bereshit, more or less, through the end of Bishallah is Mabba' Hegeri. It's articulation that is narrative. Yes, there's reference to some misvot, but we don't do those misvot because Yaakov Avinu injured his Gid HaNasheh. We do the Gid HaNasheh because Moshe Rabbeinu said not to eat it. That's in a different part of the Torah, right? So Yalif refers to the backstory, the narrative part. Now, part B. If that's the case, that Areb should precede Boker, Sefa, the end of the chapter, not of the Mishnah, but in the end of this same chapter, the Katane Bashachar Mebarech, Shitayim Lefaneha, Ve'achat Le'achareha, Uba'ere Mebarech, Shitayim Lefaneha, Ushtayim Le'achareha, Litene De Arbit Beresha. You just extolled the virtues of starting with Arbit for all things relevant to Kiryat Shema. But in the end of the Mishnah He, I believe, or Dalet or He of this chapter, when you're articulating Me Mata Korin et Shema B'Shachrin, you start with the Shachar. So, I mean, not Me Mata Korin et Shema B'Shachrin, but when you're talking about the Berakhoth of the Shema, you say B'Shachar Mebarek Shetayim Lefanea Ve'achad Ve'achareha Uba'erev Mebarek Shetayim Lefanea. You precede with Erev with Shachrit, and then you go to Erev. So Litene de Arbit Beresha, we just got finished saying how important it is to start with the Erev. Why aren't you consistent? Tanna patach be'arbit ve'hadartane be'shachrit. Ad deqai be'shachrit, parish mile de shachrit, ve'hadar parish mile de arbit. Ever played dominoes? And dominoes, each domino has two numbers on it. And when you play the game, let's say it has 5 and 6. When you play the game, you point the sixes so they touch each other. So although it's 5 and 6, it's 5, 6, 6, 5. That's a common theme in human articulation. You start with A, you go to B. While you're on B, you describe B, and then you go back to A. So it's chiasma, people call it. Biblical scholars call it chiasma. So once again, Ihachi Sefa, the Katane Mashachar Mebarek Shitayim Lefaneha, Ve'achat Le'achareha, Uba'ere Mebarek Shitayim Lefaneha, Ushtayim Le'achareha, Litene De Arbit Beresha. You have to make that question, the Timiya, with gusto, right? Tana patach be'arvit v'hadar tane b'shachrit. Our Tana in the first chapter of Berakhoth, he opens with arvit, that's us. Then he moves to shachrit. While he's talking about shachrit, he explains more the shachrit, which is the Berakhoth, and then he returns to explain the details of arvit. So far, so good. Now, this is a Seboraitic introduction. We have to ask ourselves, what does it add? You're going to see the whole sugya in a minute, the original sugya, the Seboraitic sugya. But what does this Seboric introduction add? When you see this, you always want to ask yourself, well, what does it add? What do we need? Well, a couple of things, and we'll return to this question after you've all seen the whole sugya, because it's more easier to answer. But it's doing a few things. This is about style. This is, why did you start with me'ematai instead of the what? And what was he? So therefore, you could ask hakkokhabhim, and we show that we don't have any Torah shebe'al peh whatsoever. We just have a pasuk. Okay, so he's saying that the opening with arvin is really a reflection of umshoch becha umkumecha, of the pasuk in Kiryat Shema. Okay, is that true? We have to ask ourselves, is that true? And the other one is the style, which is just this general chiasma point. Okay, that's fine. Or also, he asked two questions. The first, the Iba'it Emma answers both, right? Because you could rely on Erev and Boker, something like that. And then the second part is also just pure style. You started with A, you told us why it's so important to go to A, then you moved to B, but then you stayed in B. Why? Because that's a style, the chiasma. I don't think that adds very much, but the main point here is that we don't have any Torah shebe'al peh, and it appears that the Tana was echoing the pasuk. Is that true? Is that why the Tana opened with arvin? Answer is no, but the Sugya doesn't tell you explicitly. Derech Talmud is for us to figure out, is this setup, which seems to tee up the order in the Mishnah to reflect the pasuk, is that correct or not? And it isn't. So the Seboraitic give you a kind of a false first response. And remember, you guys, AB and Moshe will remember Masechet Makot. There was, I think, on the end of, after the second sugya, there's a thing about kinas, and there's like a first response, which is no good. And so Hacham Faor explained how sometimes when like Rav, he asks a riddle or asks a question, the students are supposed to find not the first blush answer, which everybody jumps to, but the answer which is not so obvious. And that's the real answer. And they ask these kind of riddles to force you to learn, just like in Karate Kid movie. I'm 66, so that's my cultural reference. Oh, Daniel-san, things not always as seem. And that reflects a Buddhist maxim, which is follow the invisible, not the visible. The invisible is always more important. You have to find it, okay? Same thing here, and same thing in Hacham Faor's writings, quoting Wittgenstein and many other, he says it like, dozens and dozens of times. What's not as important as the book that's written is the part of the book that's not written, what we call the Torah shebe'al peh. The way, what we call in Ladino, the le mental, when you read a pasuk, how do you understand that? What are the details it points to? Basukot teshivu shiv'at yamim. Okay, what's a sukkah? And is the sukkah of an Israelite in 1300 BC the same as in Masechet Sukkah? Probably not. But we forgot what the Israelites understood in 1300 BC, so we had to define the law. That's the invisible part. Okay, now, this introduction seems to tee up Ubshoch Becha Ubkumecha as the reason why we're starting with Arvit, and somehow that's going to be, they don't tell you why now. Why do we use a pointer or an indirect reference to Kohanim to get back to the actual time? So we're saying Me'ematai. The answer is a time that the Kohanim use for eating Tirumah legislation, and then we have to find out what that time is. We could have just said Me'ematai Korin Shema Be'arvin Mishat XYZ, whatever the time is. That's what we're going to ask now. Amar Mo. So I think this is still Seboraitic. Why? Because of the term mikveh. Mikveh is a purely Seboraitic term. The Amoraim don't really use it. So once you have this Amar Mor, and that Amar Mor is a little bit strained if you're an Emora, because it's the Tana, just like before. Tana, or Katane, he says Amar Mor, because there's no name, it's Bistam. Okay? So Amar Mor, the first opinion in the Mishnah, which is not disputed, fine. Mikveh.
May I make a point?
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Anytime.
Among more, I associate that with my father explaining the 4 levels of teaching. And he said that always the first step or the first stage of the 4 stages was to just say it, just to say the halakha. So the misader, the sadrana, would say the halakha or the law that he wants to say, or the lesson that he wants to say. So I associate Amar Mo, I mean, you said it. Now we're going to go to the next stage, which is the final stage was to actually understand what it is that was said.
Okay, very good. Yes, thank you. So now, but still, I think you could have said Katane, right? But they didn't. Why did they choose that? I think it has to do with the Seboraitic. You're right, but I think it has to do with this. This is also a Seboraitic interjection. And I think the real Sugya started right here. So what's the Seboraitic thing and why is it interjecting? Mikveh, Kohanim, emad ka'ach le'terumah. Mikveh means let's investigate. So Mikveh, Kohanim, emad ka'ach le'terumah, b'sha'at seth hakkokhabhim. Let's see. When did the Kohanim actually eat terumah? From seth hakkokhabhim onwards. So why don't you recite at the level of the style? Why don't you just say this and you'll agree with me, it rhymes. It would be a better formulation. Easy, nice, fits, rhymes. Almost the phrases are almost the exact number of syllables with each other. Why didn't we do that? Number 1. Number 2, how on earth do we know that? Who told you that? How do you know that? How do you know that? Right? So the Seboraim are injecting the premise you need to understand the rest of the Sugya. They're taking it as a fait accompli that it's Sha'at Seth hakkokhabhim, which we're going to see it's not. That's the conclusion. So they're injecting the conclusion of the whole Sugya back into the beginning. Why? So you have a kind of a reader's bias against what Abraham ibn Azra wrote. You're going to say, no, it's seth hakkokhabhim. It can't be Ubah HaShemesh. And yet, every Tanaitic source up until this Baraita comes from the Tosefta, referred to sunset. Everything in Judaism happens at Bi'at Shimsho. Side point. When does a minor fast end? I know the Shulchan Aruch says seth hakkokhabhim, but there's no time. There's no Talmudic source for that. The only source is, I think it's in Masechet Yoma, called Ta'anit shelo shake'a alav hashemesh and nahatani. It's talking about a Ta'anit sha'ot, and I think even Harambam quotes that pasuk someplace, maybe in the Mishneh Torah, maybe in the someplace else. I don't remember, but it's explicit that sunset is when the minor fasts end, because they go out of their way to say that, in Tisha B'Av, it's not that. That's not the case. You have to wait, etc. It's just like Yom Kippur. Okay. Originally, everything's in terms of Bi'at Shimsho or Bi'at Hashemesh, Ubah Hashemesh v'Taher. That's really what that means. But the Seboraim don't want you to go there, so they're injecting into the Sugya a premise. The premise is, we all know it's seth hakkokhabhim. That's what this is doing. And that now the real Sugya starts. I think it starts with this statement. You can ask the question on your own, but the Seboraim asked it for us and injected it into the Sugya. The first part, our answer, why do we use indirection? Why do we go from Kiryat Shema to Kohanim to a specific time? Why don't we just go to the specific time? That's what this Mikveh is asking. The answer is, they wanted to teach, the author of the Mishnah wants to teach you a statement, milita, on the back, which means a byproduct. It's a secondary effect. I'm telling you A, but the way I tell you A, I'm telling you another law B. What's another B? That's really what they're trying to say. Veha kamashmi alan, but by veha means what? What is veha? And this. What's the this? By saying Misha'asha kohanim nichnasin lecho bitrumatan instead of saying Misha'at hakkokhabhim. What does that teach us? That you can eat the terumah without doing the kapara for this. The people, the kohen who is in this situation addressed by the first Mishnah is called mechusar kapara. And you may know there's hilchot mechusare kapara, and there's four persons who are mechusare kapara. Zab, zaba, yoledet, mesora. Mesora could go either male or female. Those are the people who have a kapara ritual with a kohen. Then they go to the tevilah on the night of the end of the ritual period, 7 days usually. Then the next morning, because you can only go to the tevilah at the end of the day and you're not fit to bring a korban, so you have to wait till the next morning when the Ben HaMikdash opens to bring the korban, which is the total completion of your tahara. So when can you eat terumah? You can eat it after your day ends. The day in which you made tevilah, then when the night following occurs, you're allowed to eat terumah. You don't have to wait for the kapara. How do you say that in Tanaitic? The kapara, the kapara is not an obstacle. And here we're quoting the Sifra. Uba hashemesh v'taher bi'ad shimsho me'akebato mel'echo bitruma ve'en kaparato me'akebato mel'echo. That's the type of bitruma. We're quoting this is all in the Sifra. So what does it tell you? That a reason why you would include in the Mishnah a reference to the Kohanim to echo the same law. Now, before we move on, I have a question for everybody. We're saying here that we framed the time window for Kiryat Shema Shel Arit in terms of what the Kohanim do, or when you see the Kohanim coming home to their house. Why do you need that? We're saying, well, because we want to teach kapara lame'akiva, it's in the Sifra. Is it anywhere else? And if it is, then why do you need the indirection? So the quick answer is yes, it is somewhere else. Masechet, let's see. No, not there.
Page 8 in the handout on the bottom.
Very good, thank you very much, Eddie. This is Mishnah Nera'im, and it could not be more explicit. It's talking about a Mesorah. וכיבס בגדיו וטבל וטהר מלטמא כשרש והרי הוא טבול יום אוכל במעשר הערב שמשו אוכל בתרומה הביא כפרתו אוכל בקודשים. 3 stages, right? נמצאו 3 טהרות למסורה ו3 טהרות ליולד. Just like there's 3 kapara rituals, 3 stages. You know, this giluah, the second giluah, and then he has to wash his clothes, and then he goes to the tevilah, etc. 3 stages. Tibul yom ochel b'ma'aser, ha'arib shimsho ochel b'truma, hebi kaparato ochel b'kodashim. Therefore, there's 3 stages for the Mesorah of the Tahara and 3 Taharot la'yoled. Very good. This tells us explicitly, though, v'harehu tibul yom ochel b'ma'aser. Don't you know from here explicitly that kapara lame'akiva for ma'aser, for terumah, it's explicit. Which is sunset language, not hakkokhabhim language. That's Obvious. I mean, now the reader of the Sugya is supposed to know the Mishnayot, right? You study Mishnayot between ages 10 and 15. You don't study Talmud until 15 plus. So why would you need another indirect reference, a milita agab orhe in the first Mishnah in Berakhoth, when you have this explicitly in Neraim? So two answers I have. One, and we got this from Hon Ashir, Emmanuel Hayrike. He says there, the Mishnah that we have is a hybrid of different versions of the Mishnah. Mostly it's Rabbi Meir, but it's got other stuff on it. How do I know? Because many Mishnayot recite something which was obviously once bistam, and then tack on at the end of it, Dibrei Rabbi Meir, hakkokhabhim omrim, the opposite. So that first part before Dibrei Rabbi Meir was the Setam Mishnah of Rabbi Meir, which fine. But there were 13 formulations of the Torah Shebe'al Peh, 13 kind of Mishnayot X or compilations. So it could be, says Emmanuel Hayrike, that in one version, this Mishnah Neraim didn't exist, and only the indirect reference of Berakhoth existed. And he has examples about that. That could be. I think that's a good answer, but it's not, it's still a second blush, not first blush, but second blush. I think the real answer is they wanted to deal with a pasuk. And there, as we know from the Seboraitic introduction, there's no pasuk that tells you me'ematai. It barely tells you that you should do it, right? Because you know, if you really, in the Shema, it doesn't say that you must recite the Shema. Etc. Fine. It's explicit only about mezuzah. It's not explicit about what you do. Yeah, you're supposed to know hadebarim ha'ele. What is hadebarim ha'ele? It's a long speech of Moshe Rabbeinu. Is it particularly Kiryat Shema? No, I don't think in 1300 BC it was. So we need a pasuk to connect be'ematai korin et Shema be'armin to the Torah, and therefore make it appear that the Torah is prescribing you to recite the Shema at a certain time. That's what we need. Why do we need that? To publicize the mitzvah and to make everybody accept that it's deoraita. And I'll go into that a little more later. But so now you have a explicit reference elsewhere. Maybe this Tana had negaim, maybe not. We don't know. Let's assume we did. You did. Why then do you have the indirect reference? We're going to get to it in a second. So this is the ostensible milita agab orhe kamashmi alan. We're going to get, very shortly, you'll find out what I believe is the real answer. Umimai dehai, ubahashemesh v'taher bi'at orohu, umay v'taher taher yoma, dilma bi'at shimshohu, umay v'taher taher gabra. This is a common Tanaitic and Amoraitic formulation. You want to sell law A, but you know law B was originally there and law A is going to displace law B. How do you sell that? You describe law A and you say, well, how do you know law A is the correct law? Maybe it's law B, and law B was the original law, and you negate law B, and therefore you're left with law A. The Sifra, the Midrash Halacha, does this all the time. Let me read it again. Umimai dehai ubahashemesh v'taher be'at orohu, umay v'taher taher yoma, dilma be'at shimshohu, umay v'taher taher gabra. So now, does this have a premise? Is there a bias underlying this? Umimai dehai ubahashemesh v'taher be'at orohu. Who said? Ande parande, we say in Latin. Minwen lewen, who told you? Mapitom, there's this thing called bi'at oro. I never heard about that before. It's not in the Mishnah. That could be bi'at shimsho. Why do I think that? Because the Sifra we just quoted says bi'at shimsho. So you're telling me that bi'at kapara la me'akeva. Fine. But what is, now you're switching lanes and you're saying Uba Hashemesh v'taher doesn't mean like Abraham and Azra, but it's somehow bi'at oro, which is more than bi'at shimsho. How do you know that? It doesn't tell us yet. And therefore, my v'taher, but if you're going to say that the time is bi'at oro, when a kohen can eat terumah, then you have to say v'taher is a stage 2. So there's stage 1 and stage 2. Uba Shemesh, stage 1. V'taher, stage 2. Stage 1, sunset. Disk of the sun goes below the horizon. Please ignore everything you've ever heard about Rabbeinu Tam and 2 sunsets. And the Sa'ari Hagadol, Rabbi Yosef Kafer, who I love, buys into the 2 sunset theory. I don't know why. Maybe he would get slaughtered like his grandfather if he didn't go along. I don't know why, but he confuses the law profusely. Sunset is sunset. Sunset is the disk of the sun going below the horizon. That's a binary thing. It's in 1 second before it's not, and in it's daytime, and 1 second after it's nighttime. And that's the end of the story. That's the way it was throughout the entire Beit Rishon. So now, but once you inject bi'at oro, you have to find a word which is going to support bi'at oro, which is more than bi'at shimsho. It's that the residual light in the twilight sky goes away and the sky becomes like grayish. Okay, nitzaf, that's what there's a sugya in Masechet Shabbat, which is related to this one, which describes Ben Hashem Ashod. It's nitzaf, the sky gets gray. It's not black, but it's grayish, right? Now, so how do you know that Uba Hashemesh v'taher together, collectively, yield bi'at oro, and therefore the word taher can't refer to the gabra, it must refer to the sky, to the yoma, to the day. How do you know that? Dilma bi'at shimsho, maybe the time is bi'at shimsho, umay v'taher, taher gabra. And what does it mean, v'taher? The kohen has to go become tahor. Okay, which would be the ritual the next day. How do I know it's the ritual the next day? This about Rabba Barab Shela. Really, umay v'taher, taher gabra, the words taher gabra could mean stative verb. Once sunset happens, the guy is tahor. But if you're saying bi'at oro is referred to by the word taher, then and that's taher yoma, then taher gabra has to mean something completely different. It has to mean the korban the next morning. And this echoes that. Amar Rabba Barab Shela, famous student of Rab. Therefore, we know, what do you know immediately? This is Yeshivat Surah. Imken lema kera. I think it's v'taher. He should go become tahor. My v'taher, taher yoma kid amre inshe i'areb shimsha ve'ad keyoma. So we have 2 things. Reason number 1 says Rabba Barab Shela. If taher referred to the kapara, it couldn't be a stative verb. It has to be a transitive verb. V'yitaher, he has to go become tahor. Or v'yitar, even better. He goes to the kohen and asks for the ritual. Second reason, just like people say, you want to know why there's 2 stages? Everybody in Babel knows the common saying, the idiom. Ya'arib shimsha, ve'ad keyoma. First there's sunset, the sun goes down, and then the day becomes dhaka, clarified. Adke is the Aramid version of tahor. So when you say ve'ad keyoma, ya'arib shimsha, ve'ad keyoma, everybody who speaks Aramaic immediately associates that's just a translation of Uba Hashemesh v'taher. Uba Hashemesh is ya'arib shimsha, ve'ad keyoma is v'taher. So we're projecting onto the pasuk the common Babylonian folk way of understanding the end of day. And that's true. In Babylonia, the day did end at seth hakkokhabhim. It did not end at sunset. Sunset is an archaic from the point of view of, 200 AD. It's an or earlier. It's an archaic Israelite idea that the day ends at sunset. In Babylonia, it ended at seth hakkokhabhim. How do I know? Ask yourself, how do I know? The Sugya is going to tell us, but in part 3. So, Rabba Barab Shela says why it has to be bi'at shimsho. umay b'taher taher yoma, and not biat shimsho by itself, and taher gabra, which is the kapara the next day. Are we leaving out a possibility? 1000%. What possibility we're leaving out? We said this, so we've got two possibilities right here. Ubah hashemesh v'taher can mean taher yoma, two stages, sunset plus taher yoma, or it could mean biat shimsho, sunset, v'taher gabra, which based on the bias of Rabba Barab Shela means he goes to the mikdash the next morning and does the tahara for a mesorah. Very good. We left out the original meaning of the pasuk as Abraham ibn Azra informed us. The original pasuk is Ubah Hashemesh, sunset, and the guy is now tahor without any other activity. It just happens to you. That's why we use a stated verb. It's like saying Ubah Hashem. You take Ozempic. I don't know what's the verb for to be thin. I forgot. So let me flip it. You eat Madeleines every day at Starbucks. Vishamin. Right, so you do one, and you automatically become the state. Okay, so now what we have here, therefore, is this limud of Rabba Barab Shela, which seeks to superimpose the common Babylonian saying, which reflects the common Babylonian belief that the day ends at seth hakkokhabhim, onto our pasuk written in 1300 BC, which says Ubah Hashemesh v'taher. That's the art of rhetoric. And we give you a good reason why it can't be Taher Gabra. So it has to be Taher Yoma. We left out, we buried the lead about Ubah Hashemesh v'taher, the original meaning. And they're doing that on purpose. And that is why we wanted this pasuk. That's really why we said, that's the only way we could get to the pasuk about terumot. That's the only way. So we couldn't have said Mishat Seth hakkokhabhim, because then we would never have a pasuk that supports Kiryat Shema Shel Arvin being at Seth hakkokhabhim. That's what we're after. Now, the Ma'arba in the West, means Eretz Israel, Yeshivat Tiberias, Had Rabba Barab Shela La Shami'a Lehu. They did not either know or did not accept. I suspect they didn't accept, but it could be they didn't know. This Imra of Rabba Barab Shela, La Shami'a Lehu, Lehu in the plural, which means nobody in the yeshiva knew about it. Uba'ulaha ba'aya, and they in the plural asked an official ba'aya. Ba'aya is a technical term. Ba'aya means you're propounding a question on what you think is a case of first impression to the yeshiva, which means the Rosh Yeshiva is going to consider it, but in front of everybody in full session. And you are intimating by asking that, that you've looked at all the available baraitot and mishnayot, and there's nothing which is machriya, nothing. That's what you implicitly say when you ask a ba'aya. So when you say iba'aya lehu, when that person in the yeshiva asks a ba'aya, a formal question, he's saying, I'm asking a question on a case of first impression, and he's supposed to know all the sources and they're not being a machriya. That's why many times when someone asks a ba'aya, someone else from the yeshiva answers, Ta Shema, you should have known. You should have, Ta Shema is like Ta Lahone, come over here, kiddo. You should have known because it's right in this Tosefta, or it's right in this Barayata, which is officially accepted in our yeshiva, etc., etc. So they did not accept or did not know Rabba Barab Shela based on an idiom, which is a Babylonian idiom. And they asked the formal ba'aya. Hi, Ubah Hashemesh, in the pasuk, Ubah Hashemesh v'taher. This word Ubah Hashemesh, bi'at orohum, does it really mean bi'at oro? And therefore, Umay v'taher, the word taher has to be taher yoma, the cleansing of the residual light from the night sky. Olilma bi'at shimshohu, Umay v'taher, taher gabra. Now here in Eretz Israel, because there wasn't Rabba Barab Shela, there's no bias on what the words Taher Gabra mean. Remember up above in part 2, there was a bias percolated through or rippled through that you never say Taher Gabra means the guy is in a state of tahara as soon as sunset happens. Here in Eretz Israel, because they didn't have that bias, it could go either way. Taher Gabra could mean he's tahor at sunset, or Taher Gabra could mean the korban the next day. It doesn't matter. Vehadar pashtulaham barata. So when you ask a kushya, a ba'aya, and there's a tosefta that answers it, you can still ask the ba'aya with the implicit assurances to the court, to the yeshiva, that there's no machriya, if the baraita that answers the ba'aya is not accepted in that yeshiva yet. So in order to be used, lehafshit ba'aya, a Tanya or Tanu Rabbanan must be already certified and accepted in the curriculum of the yeshiva. That's why many sugyot have a ba'aya, and then someone says v'hadar pashtula, or 2 generations later, someone quotes the baraita, or sometimes an emora will just reformulate a baraita and make Amar X, Amar Rab Yehuda, Amar Rab, and he says something that's almost exactly what a baraita says. And then someone later says, Tanya Nameh Hachi. So what's happening there? This Tanya Nameh Hachi, at the time the Emora spoke, didn't exist in their consciousness. It wasn't on the available set of baraitot you could use to determine halacha. It wasn't accepted. So you have to say it as an emora. You probably looked in the archives. You see that's the halacha. You formulate it, but it wasn't accepted. So you have to say it on your own name. Then 2 generations later, they'll say Tanya Nameh Hachi. If you want further details, there's an appendix in the Horizontal Society all about Tanya Nameh Hachi. So a baraita usually is mafshit, a ba'aya, and you've heard the statement on the other side, ba'aya de la ifsheta. What do you do if someone asks a ba'aya? It was a case of first impression, and it was never an ifsheta. No, the yeshiva just never had an answer, or they never considered it. It got withheld from the docket, like Charles Schumer used to love to do, right? Just wasn't brought up. So then there's a question, what do you do with halacha? It could be A, it could be B. What do you do, right? That's a different story. But here, the ba'aya was ifshita. V'hadar pashtu laha baraita. Midekatane b'beraita siman ladavar seth hakkokhabhim shema minaha be'at orohu. Ma'vetaher taher yoma. Similar to the Seboraitic injection in part 2, which is in Babel, about mikdeh. They take it as a given. Where do they get it from? They got it from the Tosefta. The Tosefta was not known in Babel, and the Sifra was not known in Eretz Israel. So this Sugya merges the two, but each yeshiva on its own had a gap. Eretz Israel had the Baraita, and I'm going to show you the Baraita just as it appears in the Tosefta, which I skipped before. Here's the Tosefta Berakhoth. Ve'matai korin et shema be'arvit b'sha'a shebnei adam nichnasim le'echol pitan be'arvei shabbatot divrei Rabbi Meir. We don't have this in our Mishnah. So Rabbeinu HaKadosh left out the Setam Mishnah ke Rabbi Meir. He left out that. His Setam is really the Hachamim. והחכמים אומרים בשעה שהכהנים זכאים לאכול בתרומתן סימן לדבר seth hakkokhabhim. So zakaim is the same word as adke yoma. It's just, this is a Hebraicized version of adke, right? So it's the zayin, because the zayin and the dalet switch between Hebrew and Aramaic. So they said here zakaim le'echol b'trumatan, that can mean zechut. They have the right, they acquire the right, but can also mean they are tehorim, right? So when are you tehorim? Siman ladavar seth hakkokhabhim. Be'af'al pi she'en re'aya ladavar zecher ladavar. Even though there's no proof, now we know why the Babylonians all thought that the day ends at seth hakkokhabhim. That was the Babylonian culture brought to Eretz Israel by the Ole Gola, the people who came with Ezra in what, 500 BC? A pasuk in Nehemiah. which actually we call that sefer. We call the whole thing arzira. What happened when they tried to rebuild the temple? The famous Shomronim got in the way, and they sent a series of letters to Cyrus saying, oh, you shouldn't let them, it's a whole problem, they're making trouble here, just like they say today, oh, the Zionists are taking over the West Bank, blah, 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 you shouldn't allow it, right? So they tattled on us, and they would try by force to stop the work. So the Jews who were rebuilding the temple said, okay, we got to split our people into two. One half is in the construction crew, one half is in the defense crew, security. And they hold Rimahim lances all day long. Me'alot hashahar ad seth hakkokhabhim. From alot hashahar, which is pre Hanes hahama, until seth hakkokhabhim, which is post bi'at hashemesh. Right? So you see the Babylonian idea was that's the span of the day. So that's the work day. That's how you know. So the Tosefta answers the question why the people in Babel in part 2 would say Ya'arib Shimsha Ve'ad Keyoma, because they understood that there's two stages. Sunset, seth hakkokhabhim. That's just the way the day works. Okay, so that's the Tosefta. The Tosefta specifically says seth hakkokhabhim. That's where the Seboraitic got it here. That's why they have this bias, or it's a premise. Everybody assumes it to be true. And here we see that in Eretz Israel, they didn't assume it to be seth hakkokhabhim. But then when they saw the Tosefta, they said, oh, we're going to follow the Tosefta. It says explicitly seth hakkokhabhim. Shema minaha bi'at orohu. Shama minaha. It's therefore we infer from there bi'at orohu. The word v'taher is bi'at oro, not taher gabra. Taher yoma. That's the whole sugya. The reason why we why he started with arbit has nothing to do with what we said here. These are the first blush answers that the Seboraitic are teeing up for you to consider, but later you should reject them when you read the whole sugya. Why? We don't care about ubshoch becha ubkumecha. We certainly don't care about vahi'arib vahiboker. What we care about is having a source that we can doresh to yield our new law. This is legislation. Post-Arzira legislation. When? I don't know. But it's post-Arzira legislation. Now, I think it's much far post-Ezra. Why? Just like I said before, ubshoch becha ubkumecha does not explicitly refer to Kiryat Shema. There's no pasuk there in the Shema itself that actually says you must recite 2 or 3 perashiot in the morning and the night. In Masechet Berakhoth, there's a mahloket between Rab and Shemuel as to what is Kiryat Shema. I believe it's Rab who says the way we have it, and Shemuel who says, no, it's the Berakhoth after the Shema. Emed ve'yasib in the morning, and Emed ve'emuna and hashkivenu at night. That's what Shemuel believes is the mitzvah of Kiryat Shema. Now, you know from Harambam that if something is known from Moshe Rabbeinu, part of the original Torah Shebe'al Peh, there's never a mahloket on it. The fact that we record a mahloket of Emoraim means that the content of Kiryat Shema, maybe the mitzvah itself of Kiryat Shema was not, well, no, the Mishnah has it, but the content wasn't even settled until the Emoraim. And as you know from the last Mishnah in the first chapter of Berakhoth, it wasn't settled whether you read Perashat Sisit at night until after they had the revolt in the Bet Midrash in Eretz Israel, when Elazar ben Azariah became Abedin, or Nasi. He became Nasi because we deposed Rabban Gamliel because of the fight with Rabbi Yehoshua, right? Which was about Tefilat arbitration. So the Kiryat Shema is a din mufla. When you say Kiryat Shema shel Arvin is also a din mufla, and we're doresh the pasuk uba hashemesh v'taher, because that's the only pasuk we could find, there being no pasuk which deals with the mitzvah of Kiryat Shema because it didn't exist in 1300 BC. That's what the whole sugya is telling. So you've heard Hacham Fa'or say and write 95% of the Talmud Babli is dinim muflaim, because the things that are known from Moshe Rabbeinu, they're known. There's nothing to say about it. right? The Torah is very explicit on the Avodah, like in Sefer Vayikra and some other things, very explicit. You don't really need a lot of Torah Shebe'al Peh to explain that to you. But many of the things we do post-temple are dinim muflaim, and you need explanation of that. But you also want to tell the Hamon. So imagine when they legislated this. And imagine, and I'll tell you a story. I'm not telling tales out of school because she's cool with it, but my wife, like many Syrian women, I'll say, oh, we have to do X. She said, no, well, but I don't really do that because the rabbis made that one and it's not in the Torah, right? Okay. So the Hamon Ha'am does that. So when you say we have a new mitzvah from the Pasuk Ubshoch Becha Kumecha called Kiryat Shema Shel Arvit and Kiryat Shema Shel Shachrit, and then you say it's Deoraita, which they did, you want a Pasuk to sell the Deoraita as much as possible. So we go to this Pasuk Uba HaShemesh V'Taher to change the whole end of day for Jewish law purposes to seth hakkokhabhim. Sometimes, like in the movie The Matrix, the Merovingians, the old code still perpetuates or still persists. That's the case I mentioned to you about the ta'anit, the minor ta'aniot. They end at sunset because called ta'anit shelo shakya alav hashemesh in that ta'anit. But that's bi'at shimsho. And the very, very sifra we're quoting in the Babylonian part says bi'at shimsho. So we have to reinterpret the pasuk. This sifra is not telling you taher yoma. It tells you kapara la me'akeba. That's all it tells you. So we have to move to basically this idiom, based kind of loosely on the sifra, and then in Eretz Yisrael, which is why it's last. It's the most clear. It tells you the source for injecting seth hakkokhabhim in their Seboraitic introduction, and then in part 2, which is the first half of the Sugya. So this is a Sugya kefula. The two pieces are what I've called Roman 2 and Roman 3. The Seboraitic introduction I've called Roman 1. It should be. That's because I guess it didn't get on the page. But this is the Seboraitic introduction. It's a Sugya kefula umchupele. There's two parts, Roman 2 and Roman 3, and each part has an A and B, like you see in the handout. And the Seboraitic introduction echoes that structure, so it also has an A and B. And its whole purpose is to inject seth hakkokhabhim, but to give you a reason, not seth hakkokhabhim, but to give you a reason why we want to connect a false reason, a first blush reason why we want to connect Kohanim to the Mishnah. That's right. And then the real reason emerges. We need to doresh this pasuk uba hashemesh v'taher. And now almost everything ends in Jewish law ends at seth hakkokhabhim. That's why the next sugya here, which we're obviously not studying now, brings you 3 baraitot, one of which is this Tosefta, all of which have to do with Ben Hashemashot and the various opinions about the time. When is it? When is seth hakkokhabhim? There's 5 opinions in the next sugya. One of the statements in the next sugya, and one of those baraitot, points you to the 2 sugyot in Masechet Shabbat, all about seth hakkokhabhim. Once we made this new thing that's no longer sunset, which is a binary thing, now it's somehow an astronomical thing called seth hakkokhabhim. It introduces and there's a fuzzy period between sunset and seth hakkokhabhim. What do you call that now? Ben Hashemashot. Doesn't exist in the Torah anywhere. There's no Ben Hashemashot. There's Bi'at Hashemesh, which is a binary thing. It happens in a second. Ben Hashemashot takes an amount of time. It could be 16 minutes. It could be 18 minutes. It could be the time period between Kochab Sheni and Kochab Shelishi. People are all over the map. It wasn't settled until the 4th generation of Emoraim and Rabba Rabbi Yosef. Third generation, Rabba Rabbi Yosef. But that's the sugyot in Shabbat. This sets up the whole basis for seth hakkokhabhim in the first place from this baraita. So now we start Shema like we start any mitzvah that has to happen at night. That's seth hakkokhabhim. That's the new legislation. Why do we do that? The second part tells you. Because the people coming back to Eretz Yisrael with Ezra, they thought like Babylonians. You can't tell them to forget everything they know and reenact the original biblical 1300 BC paradigm of everything is the sundial. So the sun day starts at Hanes HaHama and it ends at Bi'at HaShemesh, Sheki'ah. You can't tell them that because even when they were rebuilding the temple, as earlier as Ezra, before there was ever a Kiryat Shema in anyone's imagination, they already had to deal with seth hakkokhabhim. So you can't turn the clock back. When we go to a galut and acquire a cultural norm, that's perpetuated. And it will make everybody crazy if you say, no, that's wrong. The day ends at sunset. That's the Hebrew way. You can't do that. And I say it that way because a lot of rabbis today, especially in the black hat or the kiruv movement, they try to tell everybody that everything we know is wrong. We have to act in this kind of rarefied, ancient manner, which nobody lives. It doesn't exist. It doesn't work. That's the end. So if we have any questions, I'd be happy to address them. If you have any questions later, you can always send them to me.
So, regarding the question that they asked in Eretz Yisrael, I'm puzzled as to when this question would have been asked and also what the question actually was. Because we have in the Sugya we studied in Shabbat, we have Amar Abba Bar Bar Hana Amar Rabbi Yohanan هذا خاخ ربي يهودا ذعنيان شبات وهذا خاخ ربي يوسى ذعنيان تروما. Right? He seems to be settling that issue. So is this? I mean, he was first generation, so I find it hard to see how it could be after him because the matter seems like it would have already been settled, and to have it be before him, that they already have the Baraita, wasn't Rabbi Yohanan in the first generation?
Yes, but when you have an Imra like that with two people, first of all, when you have an Imra, there's a sequence of people, but the person who's reporting it to the yeshiva is not the last person in the sequence. So there's Rabbi Yohanan, the source, Rabbi Bar Hana, the reporter. He reported to a somebody, Mr. X, who we don't know, and that Mr. X is reporting it to the yeshiva. That's the way. That's the protocol. Chacham Fa'or taught that, but I think he also wrote it somewhere in Golden Dove, the Horizontal Society. If you just search, we need a global index to all of his works, so that you don't have to kind of say, oh, let me look in Horizontal Society, let me look in Golden Doves, let me look here, let me look there. We need a global index, which they made for like Carl Jung and Freud and Newton, I think. They made a global index covering all the words. So any topic, any phrase, any other index you might think of that tell you where it appears. Okay, so we need that. But here, this is all about Tirumah for the Kohen. So when can you eat Tirumah? You're Tibul Yom, so you went to the Tibila already. Now, when can you eat the Tirumah? You have to wait until seth hakkokhabhim. Very good. Rabbi Bar Hana's Mr. X is the one who introduced that into the yeshiva late. So that in Masechet Shabbat is Eretz Yisrael, Yeshivat Eretz Yisrael, but it's not contemporaneous with Rabbi Yohanan. So right here, we don't have Rabbi Yohanan yet. He articulated that Imra outside of the yeshiva, so it wasn't known until Mr. X, who heard it from Rabbi Bar Hana, introduced it. So these logistics are really critical to understanding the Derech Talmud. Otherwise, the question, if everything's just the theory or the concept, you're 100% right. Well, Rabbi Yohanan knows this concept. That's what the Tosafot do wrong. They mix up the time axis topsy-turvy. They assume everybody knows everything that was in the fourth generation, in the first generation. They'll say, well, blah, 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 Mishemet, right? Or something in Batra, Daf 157, which didn't emerge until the fourth generation between Rabbah, Abaye, and Rabbah, and they're acting as if Rabbi Yohanan's supposed to know that because they live in the world of concepts. A concept has no time. It's just there, right? It's in the Platonic ether, right? So this is all about Tirumah. They didn't know when the Kohen can eat it. They probably, maybe Well, they knew about the barata. When he asked the ba'aya, did he know about the barata, but it wasn't yet accepted? Maybe. Or maybe they didn't. He didn't know. So the barata was revealed later. The Tosefta was edited by Rabbi Haya, who was one generation after Rabbeinu HaKadosh, so it should be in the knowledge of Eretz Israel. But you never know. So they're determining when can we eat when can we eat the terumah? We know it's not sunset anymore. That's what this is. The way he led with Taher Yomah, and then said, or maybe it's the other one. That's clearly, we're assuming it's Taher Yomah, but he's asking, how do you know it's not the other one? How do you know it's not the old way, right? Taher Gabra. And then later, shortly there, I don't know in which generation, but sometime subsequently, they introduced this Tosefta into the curriculum of the yeshiva. And now you could, it's Ba'aya the Ifshita, al-Pi the Tosefta. Now, not everything that's in the Tosefta is automatically certified. So that's why Harambam only makes halacha like a Tosefta.
That's it.
What's that? Sorry. Okay, Harambam only makes halacha like a Tosefta when the Talmud, the Sugya, endorses that Tosefta. Not everything in the Tosefta is, even though it's one of the authoritative collections that he mentions in the Hakdamat al-Mishneh Torah, you can't just take halacha from a Tosefta or from the Sifra or the Sifrei. It has to be certified or endorsed by a Sugya. That's how you know. Good question, though. And you can tell in Eretz Israel, Taher Gabra could be like Pasuk, didn't bother them. There was no pre-bias. Their source is the Tosefta, nothing more. Which may make sense because in Israel there was more of a, maybe some people lived the old culture. Maybe a lot of people thought Sugya is the end of everything. Any other kushot, ba'ayot, commentaries?
I have a question from if you wanted to talk about the history of these legislations.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that the laws for the Kohen to eat the terumah was originally at sunset.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Then through the integration of the return of the Babylonian exiles during Beit Sheni, that time limit was extended to seth hakkokhabhim.
Yes,
Because
exactly.
of popular conception that the night is really seth hakkokhabhim instead of at Shikyat Hama.
Just like we couldn't tell the conversos returning or fleeing Spain, you got to read your own aliyah or you can't go to the Sefer. So then no one would go to the Sefer except 2 hachamim or 3 hachamim sitting in the knis every day. No one would show up in the knis anymore. Oh, again? Moshe Maimon is reading every aliyah again? Eddie Mishan is reading half of them? No one wants to do that. They want to go to the Sefer, but they don't know. What do we do with them? We make a new rule. You don't have to read your own aliyah. That's integrating the conversos.
Okay, so that is on the subject of terumah, and now you have another independent law, really, which is called Kiryat Shema.
Yes.
And the strategy of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, which is not only Rabbeinu HaKadosh because it's in the Tosefta anyway.
Yes.
It's in the Tanaitic material, is to link the two.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what would you say is two questions? Number one, do we see any evidence that at any time Kiryat Shema was tied to Shikyat Hama?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. And so what was the impetus, the strategy behind linking Kiryat Shema to the terumah?
So when we legislate the Kiryat Shema Shel Arvin, we 100%, everybody's on board with, and the whole Sanhedrin, it has to be at seth hakkokhabhim. Okay? And originally they defined that, the Tanaim defined that astronomically. Finally, the Emoraim, further integrating all those communities which were far flung in different latitudes and different seasons. They don't want to play this game that everybody plays now, where it varies with season and varies with latitude, and you misrepresent the Talmud and you say the statements of Shalosh Rib'ai meal only refer to the equinox. There's no sugya that says the word equinox, right? But so to avoid all that, they said, I don't care where you live. I don't even care about Adke Yoma. I care about Shaloshet Rib'ai meal. That's what I care about. That's the law from now on. Forget astronaut. You don't have to look at the heavens whatsoever, so don't concern yourself. So that's what they wanted to do. So just like that. So the people who legislated the Shema, they said, we're doing seth hakkokhabhim. Now, if we just say that, and we say the pasuk that orders this deoraita law of Kriyat Shema is Ubshoch Becha Ubkumecha, all the Syrian ladies are going to say, oh, we don't have to do that. You don't have to do that, honey. Why are you reading the Shema for? It's made up by the rabbis. So what we do is we find a pasuk, and the linkage is only to get us to a pasuk that we can doresh to prove that the Torah considers seth hakkokhabhim to be the end of the day. Because hey, even the Kohanim can't eat tirumah until seth hakkokhabhim.
So would you say that, or would you maybe you are piggybacking on other rabbinic legislation? Yani, you have the rabbinic legislation about extending the terumah time limit to seth hakkokhabhim with a pasuk, which is officially in and accepted baraita now in the yeshivot.
Yes.
And by doing that, you really solidify the law of Kriyat Shema by tying it not to a pasuk, but to a pasuk that's quoted in a baraita.
Yes, that's right. Yes, and also we have it in Masechet Nevi'im. The law is settled. There's no question about it. It's ha'arib shimsho, whatever that means, right? So now we're kind of rewriting that right over here in this sugya, and we're saying that's what the Mishnah means because the Tosefta says so. So the Tosefta ties seth hakkokhabhim to this Mishnah, and the sugya ties the laws of Tirumot and Kohen to this Kriyat Shema. So now we can sell the idea this is really Deoraita. The laws of Shema echo the time that you can eat Tirumah. Let's say Tirumah. But the reason we say it is to give us the chance to Doresh this Pasuk, and like we do here, and that's what the Sugya does provides the Dirasha. And I think it was more of a failed effort in Babel. You're going to tell me we're going to rely on a idiom, a Gentile idiom, to determine the halacha? That's why I think La Shamia Lehu in Israel means, we don't accept it. We hear you, and we know it is the cultural change we have to integrate, but it's not enough to quote a Gentile Babylonian idiom to usher in this integration. We need more. So they found the Tosefta, and that's what they did.
And so the introduction of the Seboraim,
yes,
is almost a very, very shrewd comment.
Yeah.
There is no rabbinic material that directly ties Kriyat Shema Shel Arvin to seth hakkokhabhim.
That's right. That's right. When we say akera ka'ed, but we said hecha ka'ed katane me'ematai. So akera ka'ed, there's no kera. What's the kera? All you have is ubah hashemesh v'taher. But the introduction doesn't even go there. It just talks about style. First, why Arvin? The reason we go to Arvin first is that's where the pasuk is. There's no pasuk that we can use for Kriyat Shema Shel Shachrin. So we have to start with Arvin to lay the foundation of, it starts at seth hakkokhabhim, like the Tirumah. And then Shachrit is a different story. It starts at actually sunrise. Well, a little bit before. So similar, parallel almost, right? So then, that's right. The Chachamim went out of their way to say, you say the Amidah at sunrise. You say the Kriyat Shema before sunrise. So it's parallel, kind of. It's not the same length of time, but it's not far. I think it's 10 minutes, Harambam says. And seth hakkokhabhim is 18 minutes after sunset. So in both cases, we're kind of matching the Pasuk in Arzra. And yes, and that's in the Tosefta also. So the Tosefta gives us really the source. So in Eretz Yisrael, they had more of a good foundation in the source. Gives you the book of Ezra, gives you the notion of seth hakkokhabhim, and then tells you that's the law. That's really why Eretz Yisrael is last, because it really clinches everything. They struggled with it in Babel, I think. I think Yeshivat Eretz Yisrael nailed it. So we see how different yeshivot, the law, develops with these different inputs, and here the Talmud Bavli is synthesizing both of them, and you see the legislative history. That's important. Legislative history, I think, is what Harambam means when he says "Mevin davar metoch davar," and you understand what happened later from what happened before. I think he's talking about the legislative history, the time axis on which dinim muflaim, which is most of the Talmud, are built. La apoke, it's all in the concept, and you don't have to care about the time. Here, clear to me, if it would just be the Babel Sugya, I think it would be too weak. I don't think it gets you there. It doesn't get you over the line. It's a theory, nice theory, but I don't think it gets you to, I don't think the judges are going to vote, majority in favor. Once you get to Eretz Yisrael, I think they get it over the line. Excellent questions. This is very fun for me. Usually I study by myself. I wish there would be a Bet Midrash to go to, but this is nice.
Saku Baruch, I very much enjoyed the class. Very much enjoyed the insights. Thank you.
Thank you for asking me to do it, and thank you, all of you, for attending. I know it's late, and this was a good Zoom. A lot of Zooms I go on are, the teacher just talks. This was much better. Much better. Okay, thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you. Is there would there be a sequel potentially being organized?
Happy to do it. This is a cluster. So I it's not a hadush, but I think it's implicit, but I make it explicit. Sugyot appear in clusters, and they're not in sequence in any one masechet. They're all over the place. Because the Talmud was created at the Kalot in 2 Mahadorot, and the Kalot, over 30 years, everybody who attended, in their mind, there's the whole Talmud. There's not one Masechet, right? This Masechet we focus on now, but yes, the others. And they weren't shy to repeat material or to mix material on the same idea or legislative title of law across many Masechtot. So this sugyot that are necessary to study together is this one, the second one in Berakhoth right after this, 2 at the end of Shabbat, then another one earlier in Shabbat, which is all about when you light Nerot Hanukkah, because it has to do with when sunset is. If you ever study those sugyot be'ayun, and then you try to read Hazon Obadiah on when you light Nerot Hanukkah, you're going to need a drink. So wait till the weekend or Purim. You're going to need probably a couple of good doubles, bartender, refill it for me. Make it a double, a good double. You know what I mean? Because he totally, he makes chaos. He makes chaos where everything is so clear. The sugyot are so clear. So there's those, and then there's one in Areruvin. No, sorry, not Areruvin. Yevamot, Perek Ha'arel, where there's a lot of dirashot that are the underpinnings for all these laws we're studying, and all the other ones in the cluster. So I'd be happy to teach the whole cluster if you want over time. It's very edifying. When you see the whole thing come together, then you see exactly how they're doing legislation. Once you get to this period called Ben Hashem Hashod, there's a whole development. And then as Moshe pointed out, Amar Abba Bar Bar Hana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Halacha Rabbi Yehuda le'inyan Shabbat, Rabbi Yosef le'inyan Tiruma. So what does that mean exactly? That was a further legislation. It didn't have to be that way.
By the way, among those clusters, would you say the first sugya of Masech Ta'anit is also included?
In this one?
Same beginning.
Parallel analysis, but it's about ta'aniyot, it's not about this. So it's a parallel structure with similar words, but it's not in this cluster. I probably would add to this cluster the Sugya and Yoma, where it references Kol ta'anit shelo shaqia alav hashemesh lav ta'anit.
That's why I thought maybe by association, the first Sugya of Ta'anit would connect somehow.
Yeah, probably there's another one in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, because when you come to Kiddush HaChodesh, they still consider it day for a while after Sheki'ah. So it's not just Halacha Kirbi Yoseh Le'anyan Tiruma. It's also, that's Lechumrah, but also Halacha Kishmuel, Kochab Echad Yom, Shenayim Ben Hashemashot, Shelosha Laila. That's rejected in the second Sugya and Shabbat, which is part of this cluster. But in Kiddush HaChodesh, you can still say Mekudash after Sheki'ah before Kochab Echad. So that belongs here too, because that's another angle of legislation, which for 1,200 years they had been doing it the old way. So Sheki'ah is the end of the day. You can't say Kiddush HaChodesh on the next day. But now we went and allowed that based on Shemuel. So this legislation, the switch in legislation to post Sheki'ah end of day, ripples through many areas. And yet, many Tanaitic sources still say Bi'at Shimsho. And we just read it as Seth hakkokhabhim. So Maran, in the Shulchan Aruch, takes the end of a Ta'anit at Seth hakkokhabhim, but it doesn't have a basis for it. There's no basis at all. We just assume because we moved the end of day to Seth hakkokhabhim that everything, but it's not the case. Kiddush HaChodesh is not the case. Halacha Kirbi Yoseh Le'anyan Tiruma, it's not the case. So according to the Biyoseh, you can go to the Tevilah right before Seth hakkokhabhim. You can't eat the Tiruma until after Seth hakkokhabhim. Halacha Kirbi Yoseh. But it's still considered Yom prior to the Seth hakkokhabhim of Rabbi Yoseh, which is just at the end of our Seth hakkokhabhim. So that makes a difference because according to everybody else, all the other Tanaim, you have to make Tevilah during the day, which means before Sheki'ah. So you see, we have all these legal concepts of day and they're fuzzy to some extent. The Seth hakkokhabhim legislation created a round of fuzziness. Just wait till you get to Zava or Ziba, because the laws of Zab were very clear about, 2 for Tum'ah and 3 for Korban, Re'iyot. You have to see semen twice, then a Korban, 2 for Tum'ah and 3 for Korban. 1 ejaculation is just Ba'al Keri. Okay, fine. But everything was organized on Sheki'ah. Now that we made Seth hakkokhabhim, what happens if one of your Re'iyot starts in Seth hakkokhabhim and ends after Seth hakkokhabhim? Starts after Sheki'ah, before Seth hakkokhabhim, but bleeds over. Now what? So you can see in Hilchot Zabim, Harambam tells you what's the original Mosaic law, and he has a phrase for it. I was surprised when I read it. It's Kabbalah mi Moshe Rabbeinu Sinai, which is different than Kabbalah in general, like in Masechet Makot. Right? He tells you explicitly, if you pay attention, the legislative history. The original law was Sheki'ah. All the laws of Zab are based on Sheki'ah before and after, etc. Now that we introduced Seth hakkokhabhim, we added another layer of fuzziness and added much more legislation to deal with it. Very interesting. Okay.
Chazak Baruch, and maybe we'll try to organize something else. It seems that there's a popular demand for it. So let's talk.
As we say in Spanish, saludosos que esté and betov talim.
Thank you. All right.
Okay, great to see all of you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
I gotta stop the recording.
Thank you, Chacham. Chazak Baruch.
Thank you very much.
Hal,
Great to see you, MB. Great.
you got a minute?
Yeah, sure.
So, what do you think about? I think it's a bit too wiggy